And good morning. How's everybody doing today? It's my last day streaming from Holden Beach. The beach trip is finally coming to an end, and I will be heading home tomorrow. But I am happy to stream to you live today from the beach house, and I hope everybody's having a great week. I see we have Amber Casey on the road driving as she's watching today's lecture. Please, Amber, drive safely. We want you to get home safe today. Who else we got in the house today? Do we have Yanan? Do we have April? AK, is she here? Who else we got today? Got Jordan Smith in the house. Good morning, Jordan. Good to see you. Thanks for coming today. Boy, fall is finally here. Anybody got a good idea for a Halloween costume this year? Who's going to do something cool for Halloween? I usually don't dress up. I just never get into the I just never get motivated enough to get dressed up these days. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. Who knows? All right. Good to see everybody. Good to see everybody. All right. If anybody's here, just feel free to check in on YouTube and let me know how you're doing today. All right. You know, interesting. I'm thinking about running this lecture on through Zoom next semester so that I can actually have a live video audience while I stream. So tell your friends to pick my class for next semester because hopefully the online lectures will get even cooler. All right, let's go ahead and get started today. On Tuesday, we talked about motivation. I talked about theories of motivation, why motivation makes us different from computers, and the qualities of motivation. We then covered some of the basic theories of motivation, how it relates to personality development, how it relates to sports psychology, and we just talked a little bit about motivating the human animal. Today we're going to talk about the emotions related to being a human animal. We're going to talk about why emotions are important. We're going to talk about 3 classic theories. We're going to talk a little bit about the physiology of emotions, and we'll talk a little bit about learning to control emotions. Excuse me, I'm always a 3 sneeze kind of guy. Apologize for that. Let's go ahead and get started with today's lecture. Okay, now, here's the weird thing. When you look in the literature, what you're going to find is that there is no universally accepted definition. Just like motivation, emotion is a hard thing to pin down definitionally. What exactly is an emotion? If you talk to 10 different psychologists, and 10 different scientists, you'll get 10 different answers. Thank you very much for the bless yous. But let's just go ahead and go with a working definition, okay? It's a biological state characterized by neurological changes that lead to characteristic patterns of feeling, which we'll call affect, thoughts, which we call cognition, and activity, which we call behavior. So, any biological state that's characterized by a set of neurological responses that causes you to feel, think, or act in a certain way is an emotion, all right? And we're going to think about emotions as being different from attitudes because emotions are usually short-lived, whereas attitudes can last a long time. Emotions come and go. So, why do we have emotions? Some people would say, wow, I wish I didn't have emotions. I don't want to feel sad right now. It's just terrible feeling sad or feeling depressed. Sometimes I get too excited and happy, and that also leads to problems. Why exactly do we have emotions at all? Think about this. Emotions play very important roles for us. Number one, they provide a self-evaluative roadmap for us, right? An emotion tells me whether or not I like something or I don't like something. Should I stay here and be around this object that's causing this emotion? or should I turn tail and run away from this object that's causing an emotion, right? So if you've ever seen a snake, a bear, or anything else that looks dangerous and you have this incredibly fearful response, that fearful response provides you some very good information. It says, dude, you need to exit this situation. This is potentially dangerous. So if you think about it, emotions are actually used by us as a way of evaluating our given situation, right? They also provide us feedback that allow us to evaluate our behavior. If you do something and you feel a sense of pride, that tells you that whatever you just did was a good thing and you should do more of it. On the other hand, if you do something and you experience the emotion of shame or embarrassment or anger, it tells you that maybe that behavior wasn't the best thing you could have done. So not only do they tell us how our environment's acting, how our environment is organized and what's in our environment, they allow us to evaluate our behavior within the environment. And also, emotional displays serve to facilitate social interaction. So if I do something that accidentally hurts you, Suha or Amber, if I do something and I give you the sad face, oh my goodness, I am so sorry, and I put on my sad emotion, you gain some information and our social interaction is facilitated. Maybe you don't get as angry at me. Maybe we don't start a fight. If I smile at you when you walk in the room, that also gives you some information about this particular social interaction, right? So emotional displays are also very useful in greasing the wheels of social interaction. This is why we have emotions. They allow us to evaluate our environment, they allow us to evaluate ourselves, and they also allow us to evaluate others. So emotions are extremely important as the grease in our social world. Now, there are different ways of thinking about emotions. You can think about what we might call categorical dimensions or categorical models or dimensional models. Now, if you look right underneath me, you're looking at James Russell's circumplex model of emotions. This is a dimensional model that describes emotions as being the product of two psychological qualities: arousal, which is a level of energy or activity that you have, and also the valence, that is whether or not this you are feeling positive or negative. So look at this wheel right here, and James Russell says that you can characterize all emotions as having one of these two qualities: valence and arousal. So if you think about it, if you're feeling excited, you usually have a lot of energy, and also that's a positive state. We'll contrast that with, let's say, depression, for example, which is where you have low levels of energy and you have a negative state. So really, if you wanted to, you could characterize all of the emotions of the world as having one of two or having some degree of two qualities. So for example, if I'm angry or upset, right, you might see that I have high levels of arousal, but I'm experiencing negative affect. And so I'm upset or angry, if you will. On the other hand, if I've just been out walking on the beach, and when you walk on the beach, you feel so relaxed, right? I might be feeling serene or relaxed or calm. And if you think about it, that's sort of a low level energy state, but it's also very positive. So one way of trying to explain the relationship between emotions is to use the circumplex model suggested by James Russell. Now, another fellow who we talked about last night in webinar, and we're going to be talking about tonight in webinar if you can come to it, is a fellow named Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman is an expert in emotions, and actually, he's an expert in deception. because when people are lying, they are trying to hide their emotions. And this guy, Paul Ekman, is an expert in understanding emotions and how they leak out of us when we are trying to control them to deceive people. Now, what this guy Paul Ekman did was he wanted to know if we could think about there as being sort of universal emotions. Are there universally accepted emotions that you will see all over the world? So what he did was he took some pictures of Americans engaging in emotional states: happy, angry, afraid, surprised, right? And sad, and took them to all around the world. And he wanted to see if there were universally identifiable emotions. Now, it turns out that language is, in a sense, culture bound, in that every culture has different words for different things. Signals, hand signals, and whatnot are also culturally bound. In some cultures, this means good job. In some cultures, this means up your, you know what I mean? In some cultures, this means something really bad. On the other hand, some people count by saying 1, 2, 3. So if you think about it, lots of things that humans do are culture bound. And so he wanted to know if emotional displays were also culturally bound too. And what he found was that there are 6 basic emotions that are interpreted the same way around the world. And he argues that these emotions are universal because they have evolutionary value and they are associated with neurological and biological states that are the same around the world. And he identified these 6 primary emotions, and he differentiates between primary emotions and secondary emotions. What are the primary emotions? Well, they are anger. Notice how the brow wrinkles down, the face comes down, and I scrunch up my nose. That's anger. Then there's fear. The eyeballs get mighty, mighty big so I can see you. And I get sort of a negative look on my face, and my eyebrows raise. Then there's sadness, where my lips drop, right? Then there's disgust, right? See the eyebrow clench, the nose clenches up, and I give you that look. Then there's surprise. And then there's contentment or happiness, right? And he argues that these 6 primary emotions, no matter where you go in the world, you will see these primary emotions. Now, not everybody agrees with his theory. However, and some people, like I said, some people disagree with his theory. But he would argue that we have these 6 primary emotions with these 2 caveats or 2 exceptions. All right. He argues that you can think about primary emotions, which are these 6 emotions, but then there are secondary emotions where we blend different primary emotions together, right? So relaxed is an emotion that contains a little bit of contentment and a little bit of happiness. There are some people that argue that we also learn blends of emotions to create sort of a second wheel of emotions. And these emotions vary from culture to culture. So there are different emotions that you will find, different complex emotions that you will find in different cultures. We all have these 6 primary emotions, but then each and every culture is going to have a blend of these emotions that are unique to its own culture. Now, the second caveat is that there are rules for when we display these emotions. Now, in Asia and in America, we all show anger the same way on our face. However, there are different rules about when we can display these emotions. So displaying anger in this setting might be appropriate in the American culture, but not be appropriate in the Japanese culture. The emotion of this emotion may be appropriate in a certain situation in Germany, but not appropriate in Ghana or the Congo. So while he would argue there are 6 basic emotions that represent ways of organizing your face that can be identified all around the world, there are rules in how we display these emotions, and these emotions are combined to create culturally specific experiences of emotions. So this is one way we can think of sort of how we define emotions. What is it? Well, I don't know. But it has something to do with a feeling, a thought, and sometimes a behavior. These emotions have value for us, and they help us to evaluate ourselves, our environment, and communicate with other people. Emotions have some degree of energy and some degree of valence or positivity or negativity. And then there are rules for how we display emotions that vary culture to culture. Sort of a good introduction to emotions. Now, emotions have always been interesting to psychologists. In fact, the study of emotions may even be older than psychology proper itself. And your book's going to talk about 3 broad, old school, classic theories of emotions. And the question that was asked and and with which psychologists tried to answer these was to try to understand the mental aspect of emotions and the physiological aspect of emotions. If you think about it, if you've ever been super duper happy or super duper angry, you will notice that there are 2 distinct qualities of it. Number 1, your body feels a certain way. And number 2, your mind thinks a certain number of things. So if you think about it, there's a cognitive component to every emotion, and there's a physiological component to every emotion. I see that Ronique has just walked in the classroom. Good day, Ronique. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming today. Hey, and thanks for participating last night in the chat. We really appreciated your input. And I don't know if I said hello to you too, Suha, but thank you very much for coming into class and bringing your Arabic point of view. Suha was sending me an email and telling me about being an Arabic speaker and trying to learn English. Suha, I could not imagine taking a class in Arabic, you know what I mean, or another language. It must be super difficult. And I will tell you, folks, one of my first jobs as an undergraduate research assistant was editing the grammar of a very, very smart Palestinian scientist whose first language was not English. The gentleman was a great thinker, but when he tried to write, he didn't quite have a perfect command of the English language. And so that's when I learned that language competence and intelligence are 2 completely different things. And you can be super duper smart, but if you're thinking in a different language, it can be a little bit difficult. So I do appreciate my citizen students from around the world. Right, Amber? I love it too. The idea that people can do that just always amazes me. So let's talk about these 3 theories of emotion that try to incorporate how we think and how our body reacts when we have an emotion. Now, if you folks remember from chapter 1, I talked about this fellow, William James. William James was the father of American psychology, and he was also the creator of the first theory of emotions. And he asked the questions, how do physiological responses and the cognitive label of emotion go together? And it was his theory that environmental events cause our body to change, and then our body interprets those changes to come up with the emotion. So according to him, we would have a stimulus, a bear. You might see a bear in the woods. You might see a snake that then causes causes your heart to start beating faster, that causes you to start sweating, your eyeballs dilate, right? And your blood constricts, your mouth gets dry. And he argues that these physiological responses are then interpreted by your brain, and your brain then says this is the appropriate emotion for this particular experience. Now, research has borne him out to a certain degree. If you look at the picture way down in the bottom left corner of your page, you'll see what's known as the facial feedback hypothesis experiment. You'll notice the lady on the left has a pencil between her teeth. When you do that, your cheeks go up a little bit, and you have to create the semblance of a smile. So in a sense, the pencil makes your body, your face smile. In the picture to the right of that lady, you'll see this other lady has a pencil between her nose and her lip. And when you do this, you kind of create a frowny face, right? And so the idea is, does our body interpret our facial expression to come to an emotion? Now, what they would do in the facial feedback hypothesis is they would have people read funny stories or comics and then evaluate the humor in those comics. And what they find is that people that have the pencil between their teeth, who are making the funny face, tend to see things as being funnier than those people who are making the frowny face. And so in a sense, you might suggest that the body's response creates the label of the emotion. And this is what's known as the James Lange theory of emotion. Ooh, cool. It turns out Suha is Palestinian too. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Yes, this fellow that I worked with, what in the hell was his name? What was his name? I forgot. It's only been 30 years now. Ido Irev. And he's become quite a big psychologist. He was a young postdoc back in the day, but he's become an older and quite famous researcher in social cognition, Suha. So maybe you'll want to check out Ido Irev. I think he teaches at the Technion? Is that a school in Palestine, the Technion? I'm not sure. You can type that out for me if you want. But James Lange theory, that's one theory. And it basically says that our body creates the emotion, and then our mind interprets our body state to come to an emotion. Now, Walter Cannon in the early 1920s had a different take on emotions. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Walter Cannon, but he is very famous because he coined this phrase we call the fight or flight response. Anybody ever heard of fight or flight? Well, Walter Cannon was an evolutionary psychologist who was responsible for coining that very important term. I guess he might have been a physiological psychologist. And he coined the term fight or flight response way back in the early 20s. He actually wrote a paper on voodoo death, the sudden, unexplained death that occurs as a result of being the target of a voodoo curse. You may or may not know this, but you can actually think yourself dead. You can actually get so stressed out, your beliefs can cause your body to shut down. And so I suggest if anybody finds that kind of stuff interesting, check out his paper on voodoo death, right? Now, his idea was that the mind and the body work together. So you see the bear, and at the same time you're having the scary thoughts, your heart is starting to beat too. Your palms get sweaty and your eyeballs dilate. So according to the Cannon-Bard theory, the physiological response and the label pop up at the same time. And you'll notice the person in the picture right here, you'll notice the brain's responding and they're having the physiological response as well as the cognitive label at the same time. The signal is not good. Can you repeat your question, please? Oh, the Technion. Maybe I'll type it out. I think he teaches at this place called the Technion. I think that's the name of the college, and it's somewhere in the Middle East, and I thought it was a Palestinian college. It might not be. But I was wondering if you had ever heard of that school, Suha. Oh, Ron Moose has a funny experience. If you will, Ronique, go ahead and type it in the chat bar, and we'll talk about it after you get it written down, okay, about the fight and flight. Okay. Now, so those are two old theories of emotions. Now, the one I'd like to talk to you about now is actually from a famous social psychologist. So now we're in my home territory. Stanley Schachter is a very famous social psychologist. And the first two theories, he argued, assume an innate or biological link between physiological states and cognitive labels of emotion. He argued that there is no innate link between a physiological response and an emotion. Achoo! Excuse me. Goodness me, God bless me again. There must be dust in this place. All right. And what he argued is we do not have a link between how our body feels and what our mind thinks. He instead argues that what happens is we have physiological responses, and then we look around our environment and we interpret our emotion based upon our social situation. He argues, that the reason that we can think of it this way is because there are very few emotional states, but yet there are tons and tons of different emotions. If physiological states were directly tied to emotions, then there would be a different physiological state for every emotional state. But you know what? When you're super happy, your heart beats fast and your breathing speeds up. When you're super duper excited and happy. On the other hand, when you're super duper afraid, your heart beats up and your breathing speeds up. So if you think about it, there is a lot of similarities between being very excited and happy and being very afraid. And so what he argues is we have physiological responses, and then we look to our environment to interpret our emotional responses. And so he did this crazy experiment where he brought people into the lab, okay, and he gave them an adrenaline pill. Now, when you take adrenaline, it makes your heart start beating fast. It makes your breathing speed up. It makes you start sweating a little bit. So in a sense, you have an arousal response, okay? And then what he did was he brought people into the laboratory, and he told them to wait for a few minutes. He was going to start an experiment. And he put them in the room with a person. And this person was working for the experiment. And this person's job was to create the experience of one of two emotions. The person in the room with the participant either acted super duper happy or super duper unhappy. Now, in one part of the experiment, he would explain to the person what was going to happen to their body when they took the adrenaline. I'm going to give you this pill. It's going to make your heart start beating fast. It's going to make your palms get sweaty. It's going to make you're going to start breathing faster. And he explained the whole situation, what was going to happen to them. And he put them into the room with the happy participant or the sad participant. And after 10 minutes, he brought them out and asked them if they were happy or sad. Now, you see the happy condition on the left side of the screen below me. And what you'll see is these people had been explained, if they had been explained as to whether or not what was going to happen to them, he found that the person in the room didn't change their emotional label. They didn't get happy. They didn't get unhappy. But if you put them in the room and didn't explain to them what the pill was going to do to them, they didn't know that they had taken an adrenaline pill, and he put them in the room with either a happy or an angry model, he found that the people began to experience the emotion that was portrayed by the model in the room. So if I'm in the room and I'm having a physiological response, I don't know why, and this person's acting happy, I'm going to assume that I must be having this response because I'm happy. On the other hand, if these people were in the room with the model who was acting angry and they didn't know that they had taken an adrenaline pill, they just felt this emotional activation, he found that these people tended to think of themselves as angry. So basically, what happened was these people had a physiological response that they couldn't explain, and they assumed that it was partly to do with their own emotional state, and they didn't realize that they were being affected by their social environment. Okay, he did the same experiment in the 70s with attraction. And basically, he would have people, he went to two bridges, one which was a low bridge that didn't cause you to get scared, and one was a very high bridge that swung a little bit and caused people to get a little bit nervous. Well, what he did was he put an opposite-sexed model at the end of the bridge doing a survey. And these people would come off the bridge either scared or either aroused or not aroused. This person would give them a survey. Then the person walked up another 50 feet, and he had a second experimenter who said, hey, how attractive did you find that person that just interviewed you? And he found that when people crossed the low bridge that didn't get them aroused, people didn't find the model as attractive as they would have if they had just walked across a tall, scary bridge that made their heart beat fast. Now, why do we care about this? Well, if you're going out on a first date with someone and you want them to find you attractive, take them to an upbeat movie that causes them to get a little bit excited. Not too excited, they'll realize what's going on. But if they get a little bit excited, they'll look at you and go, wow, my heart must be beating fast because I find this person attractive. And so his theory was what's known as the misattribution of arousal theory. He argued that emotional states are quite similar. And what we do is we determine our emotional state by looking at our social situation. Okay, let's go back to Ronique's comment about the fight or flight response. We were in an operation, and the guy who was a point man saw a guy with a weapon, and he froze the lead and the team had to give him a slap in the face to get him back. He was really a newbie. You know what? Good point. That Ron mentions. Animals have two basic responses to fearful events. There's the fight and flight response. So sometimes the animal runs away. But if you've ever seen a mouse being chased by a rat or any animal being chased by a predator, sometimes there's the freeze response too. And the freeze response is an adaptive behavior that allows the animal to potentially hide from a predator. So Ronique's talking about his friend. He was overwhelmed with fear. Instead of running away, he froze, and he actually had to be slapped to get him back to reality. Holy cow, a fright or flight. That is absolutely amazing, the technion. So the Arabic word for the technion is that what you wrote, Suha? And you folks know that you read Arabic from right to left, not left to right. And I did learn my letters, my Arabic letters, a long time ago, Suha. So it looks like the first two letters, is that Al, A-L, in the first two letters? And the little horseshoe with the dot, that's an N, correct? Or that has the N sound, I think, Suha. I may be showing my ignorance. So, oh, I got it right. Bonus for Chris Roddenberry. Look at that, Suha. I tried to learn how to speak the language, but I was trying to learn it on my own without a teacher, and so it was super impossible. But I did learn the alphabet. Okay, now let's talk about the biology of emotions, because if you look at the biology of emotions, you can see how it incorporates cognition and physiological arousal too. So Emotions are useful because they allow for the decoupling of behavior from reflexes or simple learning. You can now have feelings about situations, things, and people. These feelings can be stored as memories, and they allow your behavior to become more complex, right? So if you think about it, simple animals have a reflex. They always run away from you. In most animals, no matter how nice you are to them, how many times you feed them, how many times you try to show them that you're not a danger, most simple animals are going to have reflexes that they respond to that cause you to never be able to build a relationship with them. On the other hand, more complex animals, mammals, as well as humans, our emotions allow us to store our feelings towards objects as memories. These feelings can change based upon experience, and these allow us to have more complex forms of behavior. Holy cow. There you go. Suha is giving us a short Arabic lesson in the chat bar. Thank you very much, Suha. Look at that, folks. You are getting a bonus 2-for-1 lecture today. You're learning a little bit of psychology, and we're getting the Arabic alphabet. I highly suggest all of you try to learn this very beautiful alphabet and its script. It is super duper cool, and the letters change depending upon whether or not they're capital, or they occur in the middle of the word or the end of the word. It's really, really cool, and I highly suggest you folks take the time to learn it, right? But back to emotions. So emotions help us decouple our behavior from reflexes, right? Now, there are two parts of our nervous system really involved in there are several parts of our nervous system involved in emotional processing. You can think of our amygdala, no problem, and our frontal cortex. Those are the two most important parts in our emotions, right? So we have the amygdala, which is our basic animal emotion center. Ronique, this is where the fight or flight response originates. Think of your amygdala as sort of your animal emotion. It works super duper quick to cause that immediate response that sometimes protects you from danger. So if you've ever turned around and seen somebody and you jumped before you knew it was just your friend, you know what I mean? If somebody's ever scared you, like a friend you know that you're not scared of, but they walked through a door and you weren't expecting them, and you jumped really quickly and yelled, that was your amygdala firing up. Your amygdala's its job is to respond with emotional responses super duper quickly to keep you alive, right? And so that's what we'll call the fast pathway to emotions. So stuff comes in through your thalamus. Remember, all sensory experiences come in through our thalamus and go straight to the amygdala, and that causes that immediate, quick emotional response. That's your quick path for emotion. But then your thalamus also sends that information to your temporal lobe and your frontal lobe. Now, your temporal lobe is where you remember all the things you've ever experienced, whether or not they made you afraid, whether or not they made you happy, whether or not they made you sad. And your frontal lobe is important for impulse control and for managing thoughts and thinking more deeply about objects that you encounter. And so the thalamus also sends information to your frontal lobe and your temporal lobe, which creates more complex emotional responses, right? If I see a bear charging at me, I don't need to think too deeply about it. My amygdala fires up and I run like hell. On the other hand, when I walk into the office and I see Bob, and Bob is a butt-kissing, backstabbing, double-crossing kind of guy who I've had lots of interactions with, I may need to think deeply about Bob before I decide to myself, man, it's Bob again, right? And so that's your slower, more thoughtful emotional processing, right? So what happens when we have an emotional response? Our amygdala fires up, and then that information is transmitted to our frontal and temporal lobes, where we adjust the emotion, right? So, if you've ever noticed young children, 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, cry about stupid things and they have emotional fits and throw tantrums that they can't control. And that's because their frontal lobe and their temporal lobes haven't matured yet. But one of the things that happens as we grow up and become more emotionally mature is that our frontal lobe starts controlling or adjusting how our amygdala responds. So your amygdala, as soon as you see Bob, your amygdala may immediately say, punch him in the nose. But then your frontal lobe says, nope, you don't want to get fired. Pretend you like Bob. Control your emotions in this situation, right? So if you think about it, we sort of have these two processes affecting our emotion. Our fast physiological fight or flight response and our more thoughtful, learned, emotional responses that we call emotional maturity, right? Now, I'd like to take you back all the way to chapter 2. We talked about a fellow named Phineas Gage in chapter 2, and you'll see the picture, the cartoon picture of his skull down here. Phineas Gage, if you'll remember, was the guy that had part of his frontal lobe destroyed. He was a railroad worker in the 1860s. There was an explosion and a half-inch in diameter railroad spike that was 3 foot long, half-inch in diameter, was driven up through his cheek, went through the back of his eye socket, and blew out the frontal part of his brain. Now, the crazy thing was, Phineas Gage didn't die. Phineas Gage didn't even lose consciousness that day. He never passed out. And 3 days later, he was up and walking around as if nothing had ever happened. However, his emotional functioning completely changed, and he was no longer able to control his emotions. He became emotionally immature and would start fights and would argue with people and couldn't get up for work and just basically became the kind of guy that we would all say is emotionally uncontrolled, right? Now, here's the thing. If any of you have ever unfortunately been around somebody who has Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, what you're going to notice is the characteristics of that disease, especially Alzheimer's and dementia, is the loss of emotional control. So if you've ever been around somebody who's in end-state Alzheimer's or has bad dementia, you're going to notice sometimes they will get angry and they will treat the ones who are taking care of them absolutely awful. They will be so mean and hateful to people. And you shouldn't judge these people. What's happening, especially in Alzheimer's, is your brain cells are actually dying. And in people with Alzheimer's, the brain cells in the frontal part of the brain, the frontal lobe, die before the other parts of the brain die. So their ability to control their negative emotions goes away. Yes, and they will cry too. Exactly. Ronique asks a question. What if your amygdala is not working? Yes, they do cry a lot. Yes, they do. Ronique, you bring up a very, very good point. Damage to the amygdala may impair people's ability to assess the emotional content of faces. So you do that primary processing of my facial experiences with your amygdala. And if you have damage to the amygdala, if I smile, you may not be able to interpret my face as a smile. If you think about it, we interpret people's facial expressions so easily, so effortlessly. But if your amygdala is damaged, you actually will have difficulty reading people's emotions on their faces. Now, I will tell you one other story, Ronique. I mentioned this in class last night. There's an experimentally created condition that's been created in monkeys only because it's not it's unethical to do this in humans, but it's called Kluver-Bucy syndrome. What they do is they'll go into Capuchin monkeys and they'll destroy their amygdala to see what happens. And it turns out that when you do this, monkeys automatically lose their fear of natural predators like snakes and eagles. Monkeys lose their fear of these feared objects. They begin to eat their feces. Most of you wouldn't do that because that's a disgusting thing, right? but monkeys lose the ability to judge this thing as disgusting, and monkeys also start trying to copulate, have sex with all kinds of objects that are not appropriate sexual objects. Humping rocks, humping trees, humping inanimate objects. So in a sense, if you think about it, your sexual motivation, your fear, these are primary emotional responses that are created way down deep in your brainstem. And when you destroy the amygdala in these monkeys, they start acting with these inappropriate emotional responses. That's a really good question, Ronique. Thank you very much for asking this. And wow, yes, she witnessed this situation. Interesting, Suha. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, let's go on. Paul Ekman, 6 universal. He actually adds one more called contempt. It's not pictured below. These are the 6 primary emotions. You'll notice going top to bottom, left to right, we've got anger, we've got fear, we've got disgust. Bottom row, we've got surprise, we've got happiness, and we've got sadness right there. So you see all of these 6 basic emotions. Now, there appear to be these 6 or 7 emotions that have universal meaning. They are independent of culture. However, different cultures have different rules about when you can demonstrate emotion. So, for example, in America, when your boss is reaming you a new one because you're not a good employer because they don't like you, we may show some negative emotion, and we may get sad, and we may even show a little bit of anger. But in some Eastern cultures, if your boss is cussing you out and telling you what a crappy employee you are, you're supposed to smile as if you enjoy the feedback. And that's because cultural rules suggest that you're not supposed to show the emotion that you're really feeling. So there are display rules for how we demonstrate these emotions. And then there are secondary emotions, which are blends of these primary emotions that vary in expression from culture to culture. Now, one of the neat things about Paul Ekman, if you remember, so part of an emotion is your biological automatic response, and part of it is your frontal lobe controlling your emotion, giving you a controlled emotional response. One of the crazy things is when we try to hide our emotions, they leak out a little bit, even when we're trying to hide them. So my boss Dave may come up and I may hate Dave, right? But I'm going to try to smile and let Dave, so Dave thinks I like him. But what Paul Ekman has shown is that what you'll do is if you look at people closely, their true emotion will leak out for just a second. And one of the things that Paul Ekman has done to become an expert in detecting lies is he has clues that allow him to see nonverbal emotional leakage in the form of what he calls micro expressions. Innate, quick emotional responses registered in the face that tells you how someone really feels when they are trying to hide an emotion. So if you ever come up on a group of people and you think you saw disdain or a sneer in their face before they started smiling at you, guess what? They probably don't like you. And that micro emotion leaked out and told you how they really felt before they put on the fake emotion. So I want you to know about micro expressions. All right, now here's the deal. Yes, emotions are biological. However, you can and should help your children control their emotions. Emotions are a combination of physiological response and a cognitive label. What you have to do as a parent is to teach your child how to adjust that initial response created by their amygdala. We all want to cry sometimes. We all want to get angry sometimes. But what we need to do is we need to learn how to adjust that feeling using our frontal lobe. And if you think about it, we engage in emotional regulation as a way of being successful adults. If you've ever worked with somebody who has emotional problems, if you've ever been in love with someone who has emotional problems, it can be difficult to be around a person that cannot control their negative emotions. So emotional regulation is a very important key to being a successful human being as an adult. A lot of times what we do is we look at a situation and we'll reframe it. Yeah, Paul is crappy, but he's better than other bosses. So I've, in a sense, reappraised this event. And you know what? I should hate him, but he could be worse. If you've ever taken what we say lemonades and made lemonade, you're engaging in reappraisal. You're looking at something and saying, yeah, it's bad, but it could be worse. Sometimes we laugh about things that really make us mad or that make us sad. If you've ever had people say, well, you know what, I'm laughing because if I didn't, I'd be crying. One way to change your emotional state is to look for the humor in a given situation. And then sometimes, especially with children, you can change their emotional state by distracting them. The kid's crying because they want to go to the Ferris wheel, but the Ferris wheel is closed. So you distract them by saying, you know what, I'm going to take you down and we're going to look at the ducks in the duck pond. Yay! You're, in a sense, distracting them. And as a parent, it is your job to help your child learn how to regulate their emotions. Yes, emotions are biological. However, there's a critical period for emotional development, just like there's a critical period for vision, just like there's a critical period for language that we talked about, the language acquisition device. You have to have somebody help you to learn how to control your emotions before you get too old. Because if you get too old and you haven't learned how to control your emotions, it can be too late. And then you become one of those people that nobody wants to be around. Now, what you're going to find is that there are two styles of parenting in response to negative emotions. One's a good style and one's a less effective style. Now, where I come from in the deep South, if you started crying or throwing a fit, a lot of times your Southern parents would say, stop that crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Anybody ever had that experience? I see Ron Eco's stepped away from the keyboard. Hopefully he'll be back in just a second. Anybody ever had parents that told you that? You stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for, right? That's what's known as emotional dismissing parenting. If you've ever had a parent that says, no, you're not really sad, you shouldn't be crying, that's not something to cry about, and just told you to quit crying, some parents try to coach their children by saying, don't have this emotion. That's an emotion dismissing parent. Now, here's the deal. Yes, you want your child to learn how to control their emotion, but you don't do that by denying the emotional content. That's not the right way to do it. That's called being emotionally dismissive. Instead, what you need to do is coach your child through that emotion. Yes, I know you're sad, but you know what? We get sad sometimes and it's going to be okay. You'll get over this sadness. Then that's when maybe you teach them how to reappraise. You know what? Yes, the Ferris wheel is closed and we can't go on that. And I know it makes you really sad, but we can go over here and look at the ducks and feed the ducks, and that'll make you smile. So in a sense, you can help the child reappraise or find humor in the situation, or you can distract them away. But the deal is, what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't tell your kids not to have an emotion. Instead, you should take that negative emotion and use it as a teaching event. I know you're feeling this way, but you really, if you think about it, you can feel this way, or you can feel this way, or this negative emotion will pass. So what I want you to know as you raise your children is to learn how to be an emotional coach. Don't tell your kid not to have the emotions. Instead, help them work through the emotion and learn how to adjust the emotion on their own. Okay, so that's all I have to say today about emotions. I hope all of you are happy. If you're sad, I'll tell you to put on a smiley face and say, it could be worse. You could be doing something you don't want instead of sitting here in front of a fabulous psychology lecture, right? So does anybody have any questions before I log off? Don't forget, today is discussion board day. You have to do your discussion board in order to get credit for the weekly collaboration. There's a webinar if you want to come to tonight at 8 p.m. And and we're almost done with week 9. We are more than halfway through this semester in at Wake Tech. So all of you should be patting yourself on the back for making it this far. You've done a great job. Any questions before I go? Did you folks enjoy today's lecture? Thank you. You don't have to do that. Wow. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you very much for the applause. Wow. I know. I do my best. Okay, so is everybody good to go? Everybody good to go? Great. Hey, thank you for coming, Suha. Thank you for the off-the-cuff Arabic lesson. We do appreciate that. It was always great to have you and all my international students in this class. I got Ronique is an international student. Yanan is not here today, but she's usually here. One of the things that I absolutely love about Wake Tech is the fact that my students are from all over the planet, and I love it. It makes for a very interesting class. But I'm going to go ahead and log off now. Have a great week. Do your discussion board, come to webinar, and good luck with the rest of your classes. Take care, and I will see you next Tuesday.